Our first three-part workshop series for executive leadership. We're very excited to do this today on the topic of think and negotiate like a CEO. Hold on. There we go. Sorry, a little technical. All of you know the three-part series. Just want to go over what we're going to be doing over the next 6 weeks or so. And first today is really, Kimberlee will open it up and we'll be talking about preparing actually for what we're calling the second event, where we're really getting down into the skills of negotiation. And we will be able to partner you up today and we'll talk through that. I'll leave that to Kimberlee to discuss. Then in November, we're going to come back and do lessons learned. And the idea here is this is a very strong topic we love, but this is a way to really practice the skills. So we're really excited to do this and excited for Kimberlee and TerraPro to be here today. A little bit about WCS. As far as the upcoming events that are coming up, we have on the 30th, our virtual happy hour with the Clean Power Alliance, and it's about decarbonizing the grid. And September 24th, Sustainable Autonomous Future. Note that all these are on our website and more, you'll see. Also this year, our WCS Talks is our annual event. I'll talk about a little bit, but it's going to be broken up this year, and it's going to be all virtual. We'll have 3 parts, and we'll then have our 3rd annual pitch competition as well. So this year, when we kind of launched into the virtual world immediately and started doing a lot more programming, we thought it would be also good to create a virtual membership. I won't go through all the benefits, but there are a lot of them, as you can see on the screen. Go to the website and you will learn more about them. Okay, I think everyone here has been on Zoom a lot, but I just want to do this as a reminder. You know, unmute yourself, mute appropriately. We'll be putting you in breakout rooms. Share your video when you can, or a picture. Be sure your full name is there. And also make sure you put your LinkedIn in the chat. We will at the end give everyone the LinkedIn's as well. However, it's good if you want to connect right away, go ahead. Also, friendly reminder, confidentiality in the breakout rooms. Be respectful, be present, be an active listener. So today, we have an hour. It's going to go quick, but I'm very excited to do this. We will have Kimberlee after I introduce her, and then we'll do, as I said, a breakout session in pairs. Come back and really talk about what we're going to do between now and the October 1st event. And then we'll go back into larger groups to actually talk through discussions there, and then we'll wrap up. So with that, I want to introduce Kimberlee Centera. Kimberlee is the CEO and president of TerraPro Solutions. Kimberlee is a leading risk management expert for the development and financing of large-scale generation projects. She has been in the industry for 25 years in renewables, in an industry that is very much so male-dominated and still is. Under her leadership, this is quite impressive, so remember this, TerraPro Solution has generated over 10 gigawatts of renewables. She is also a huge supporter of WCS. TerraPro Solution is a corporate sponsor, and she's also given her personal time to do this event and others in the past, and I'm sure more in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberlee.
Thank you, Julia. I'm really excited to be here, and talking about negotiations and leadership is something that I'm just really passionate about. And so I'm so thrilled to be able to share all that with you, and, you know, lessons learned, a little bit about my business. And as Julia mentioned, we're really building, this is an introductory piece here, part 1. We're going to focus on all the heavy content really in our second program. So we're going to be introducing a lot of the concepts today and then moving through. So today I'm going to touch on things, and really the focus is going to be on that plan of action. And I'm going to share with you a story of my own experience. But before we launch into that, I want to talk about the power of negotiations and what it really means for us as women. And recent research indicates that 57% of men negotiate their first salary, and only 7% of women negotiate their first salary. And so what this means to us over the course of our career and our lifetime and our earning power is that we give up over $2 million in income, aggregate income over the course of our career. So this idea of negotiating and learning the tips and the skills and getting comfortable with negotiations is something that's really pivotal for us as women, and it has a real effect on our careers and our income. And so I'm going to go to the next slide. Julia, trying to go to the next slide here, but thank you. So a little bit about me and my past. As Julia said, 25 years in renewables. And I started working for a small wind developer in San Diego, and we used to develop 50 megawatt projects. We did our own construction. And so I learned, really, and then we would sell projects and operate them. So I got to really understand the whole life cycle of projects from the inception, because I was specialized in real estate and title, all the way through to operations. So really got familiar with that life cycle, and it's very instrumental in our helping our clients. But I worked for a small wind developer, and I would say right around 2005, our company was sold to a very large Fortune 500 independent power producer. So we went from small 50 megawatt projects up to 1,000 megawatt projects and beyond. And when I worked for the small company, we were very wholly dependent upon financing, which helped me to get really good at understanding finance. Went to the larger company, and again, finance, but it looked different, because when you have a large company with a big balance sheet, it's going to impact your transactions. In 2012, the company that I worked for decided to exit renewables, and we know that happens. There's a lot of risk, and companies become all of a sudden risk adverse, or their perception of the risk changes. And so I found myself working as a consultant, and then eventually I ended up with my business. And so I like to tell people that I negotiated myself out of a job and into a career and into a business. But what is really pivotal, and there was a really important time, if I look back over my career, I can see where there was a progression, each job, each role that I had built on the next step. And so when I look back over my career, I can see how important it was, each of those different roles, how it prepared me. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But there was a really important time in my career where I had to make a decision. And I want to share that with you because it forms a lot of the basis for what we're going to be talking about today and going forward. And that was when I was working for the small wind developer. I had just had a baby, and I was working remotely. And we had a very complex transaction that I was working on. And in the early days of renewables, there wasn't the understanding about risk like there is today in liability. So for me in the real estate part, it was extremely complicated and very difficult. And I remember when it was done, we had a debrief, a management debrief, and we were all sitting around the table. And of course, I was the only woman. And I'm looking at this, around the room, and I'm realizing that, everyone's a vice president. All these men, there's a vice president of, transmission, vice president of meteorology, vice president of finance. And I was the only one who wasn't a vice president. And I thought to myself, why not me? I just completed this very difficult transaction. I got great results. And so why not me? And so I did something that was really, I think, pivotal. I took a step back and I looked at myself. I looked at my role. I looked at my contribution, and I put together a written memorandum for my supervisor. So I didn't just go into my supervisor and say, hey, I think I deserve this role, right? I put together a rationale in writing, and I outlined what I had done, my contribution. I had negotiated some savings for the project. I had saved like $150,000 on title and some other things. So I was able to lay all that out in writing. And I mention that because it taught me some really important things, and we're going to be talking about these. First of all, it taught me as a woman, to be willing to take a seat at the table, right? We need to be prepared to take our seat at the table. Secondly, it taught me that we need to ask. And thirdly, it taught me that we need to be prepared with a plan, with a strategy. And this is really where we're going to focus, because as women, we don't always think that way. We think that other people are going to take care of it for us. But we're going to talk on how we can prepare with our own plan of action. So Julia, let's go on. Before we talk about this, I want to talk a little bit about leadership, because leadership has changed, and it's important for us to understand this, especially as women, because when we think about negotiations and how we can use this to help us in our roles and in our careers, it's really important to take a look back at the differences in leadership. So it used to be, if you take a look at the 1960s, for instance, there was an emphasis on technical and functional skills. So if you were able to perform your job at a high proficiency from a technical or functional level, then you were automatically considered to be, management material. You were promotable. When you fast forward to today and the new leadership, what we're finding is that it's no longer sufficient just to be able to talk about, just to be able to demonstrate your proficiency from a technical standpoint. You have to be able to demonstrate that you have a grasp of the business fundamentals, that you have the business acumen to be able to perform a certain job. And so what do I mean by that? And I can actually give you an illustration from my own business. I have a person who worked for me, very, very highly efficient in their job, from a technical and functional standpoint, able to really perform at a high level. And in fact, we had comments, from outside stakeholders on this person's abilities. We were looking at promoting this person into a higher level management role because we wanted to create a little bit more of a hierarchy in our company. And so we started to look at, this person from an executive standpoint. Unfortunately, what we found is that while this person was highly proficient from a technical standpoint, they were not able to build teams. They weren't able to collaborate. They weren't able to gain the trust of their peers and their colleagues. And so in the end, we weren't able to promote this person because they were not going to be able to lead like we needed them to be able to lead. And when we get into tactics and some of the other pieces of leadership and especially of negotiations, we're going to talk about ways that you can look at your skills and improve your skills, because we all want to be able to move forward. And I think 2020 and going into this next decade is really the decade of women. And I think especially from COVID and quarantining, the challenge for management now is connection, is to be able to promote connection and collaboration. And women have those skills. So we want to be prepared. So let's go on, Julia, to the next slide. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the new leadership is about being able to demonstrate that we can make the higher decisions. We're capable of the higher decisions, that we can contribute to the business strategies for the key decisions. So how can we do that? First of all, we need clarity around our role. We need to be able to demonstrate preparedness. We need to be able to demonstrate an understanding beyond our current function and our current role. And the other thing that's really pivotal is, and I'm sure you've heard this term EQ, or emotional intelligence. We need to be able to understand and read and use and develop our emotional intelligence. And this is going to be key for leadership going forward. So we really want to look at this. And how can we do that? We can use negotiations as a way to be able to demonstrate our preparedness, to be able to illustrate, who we are and what we can do. So let's go on, Julia, to the next slide. So we're going to talk about strategy. And So when we think about strategy, and now we're going to start to really look at negotiations because it's so pivotal for us as women. Strategy and negotiations really is about how you can give the other side what they want on terms that you can accept. A lot of us go into negotiations and we're only thinking about ourselves. But the key is, how can we get the other side what they want? The reason, and I didn't mention this, but when I submitted my request in writing for the promotion to vice president, I got the promotion and I got the raise. I got both things that I requested. But it was because I was able to demonstrate that I had contributed to the team, that I had gotten the results. How can we demonstrate that? Through negotiations, and that is how we collaborate. And negotiations is about strategic relationships. So when you look at negotiations and how negotiations used to be perceived, negotiations used to be a competition. There was a winner and there was a loser. Somebody walked away from the table and they got what they wanted, and somebody else walked away and they made all the concessions. And this is typically, it was seen as tension. There was tension between the parties, right? In the 1980s, they did a study on negotiations, and what they found is that the most successful negotiations were the result of a collaboration. They were a result of building a partnership, of building a structure around which people walked away feeling like they each got what they needed and what they wanted. And so this was a very pivotal time in the transition of negotiations. And some of you might have heard the term BATNA, Best Alternative to Negotiated Agreement. That term really came out of those studies from the 1980s on how we can restructure negotiations so that we can be more successful. So let's go on. So some of the key points, and we're going to touch a little bit again. We're going to spend a lot more time on this when we get to the next segment. But when we're starting with negotiations and we're thinking about our strategy and how we want to approach negotiations, you're going to start with what I call your foundation. And your foundation is where you start to negotiate with yourself. That's out the door. That's where you start with yourself or with your team. What is it that we're trying to achieve? What's our mission? If you're thinking about yourself in your own career, you're going to be thinking about, am I willing to relocate? How do I feel about remote working? How do I feel about travel? This is where you identify what's important to you. And if you're working on more of a commercial negotiation, you're going to be looking at what's important to your counterparties. In my business, and I have a training and coaching business besides my consulting business, when I'm working with my clients and we're going to take our clients into a new community or a new area, and we're going to work around negotiating leases, let's say, we're going to take some time to understand that community. We're going to understand what their concerns are. Is it oil and gas? Is it ag? What are the uses? So your foundations is where you start. That's where you're asking the questions and you're starting to lay the basis for your negotiations. Next, we have barriers. When we think about barriers, a lot of those are known, right? We have race, we have gender, we have culture. But in a lot of cases, barriers can be more subtle. I have a woman that I work with as a coaching client who works at a very large company, and she tells me, she says, Kim, there's supposed to be a pathway for promotion of women, right? They advertise this, they say there's an opportunity for women to promote. But she said, when I look around, she said, I have no idea who to talk to. I have no idea what that means. I have no idea how to access it. And that's a barrier, right? And so we need to understand what our barriers are. And it's interesting when you look at women, you look at women from their 20s to their 60s throughout the course of our career. A lot of our barriers are the same. Not understanding our value, fear, being a little bit insecure, lack of knowledge. So these are all things that we're going to talk about, especially when we get to tactics. And tactics is where we're going to spend the lion's share of our time, because I really want you to understand the power of tactics. And it's interesting because there's even new research out now that talks about now that we're virtual, right? What does that mean? You know, it used to be, you know, can you sit down and talk face to face? We don't necessarily have that option anymore. And so what information do we have where we can communicate in this virtual setting? And what's the best way to do that? We want to understand that, especially as women, because there's some very compelling research around what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And we need to understand that to be successful. So let's go on to the next slide. At this point, we're going to ask you to go into your breakout rooms. We've assigned you to pairs, and what we want to do is just have you get acquainted and share a little bit, give your elevator speech as a chance to practice your elevator speech if you've got one. Spend a few minutes just getting to know one another, and then we're going to come back. This is just going to be a short breakout room. So I think we're going to be assigned automatically. So we'll just, and then we'll come back, and when we come back, we're going to talk about plan of action and how we can start to think about that and prepare.
Having a small technical difficulty, give me one moment.
While Melanie's working on that, real quick, we might get launched off in the middle of this, but just wanted to let everyone know that I am on the board of WCS and co-chair of the Career Dev Committee with Melanie Lucas Conwell. So if anyone has any questions after this, please feel free to reach out to us as well. And also, we're also on the Pitch Comp Committee, and I'll ask everyone here too, if you know wonderful entrepreneur women, that we'd love to have them apply.
I will mention too, Julie, it's kind of interesting, and I know we might break out any minute, but you know, there's one trick in negotiations, and it's called silence. And it's very interesting because as women, a lot of times, you know, we're filling the silence, right? But actually, when you're sitting around the table and you're negotiating, to stop even talking. And a lot of times what will happen is your counterparty, whoever you're negotiating with, will start to fill in the silence, right? And you can gain a lot of really valuable information, sometimes just by taking a step back and just, you know, waiting, right? And it's a real subtle strategy, but it's one that can be powerful. And I think also, great, I see someone that's learned this in the past and have used it. It's a very interesting tool for us. And so again, we're going to spend time talking about tactics and a lot of time on that in our main presentation, because there's so much great information out there. And, you know, for us, you know, we want to be prepared. I think that's the most important thing for us as women. And there's just a lot that we don't learn, you know, and I think that's another culture, it's another barrier for women, is that we are just not trained. You know, you ask a man why he gets a promotion and he says, well, it's because I'm great, you know, but you ask a woman and, you know, she's going to say, well, I had help, or it really wasn't me, it was really so-and-so. So I think we have to get comfortable with assuming our own success. And that's why this plan of action is going to be so important, because I really want you to take a step back and look at yourself.
And with that, off we go.
I think I'm muted too. Great. All right, I think we're all back. Is that right, Julia? We're all back from our breakout rooms?
We still have breakout rooms filing in. I'm seeing the participant number increasing. Let's give them another second.
Great.
Moving on to something else.
So are we all back? So I hope you all had a chance just to get to know one another and chat a little bit. You know, the power with this webinar and with what we've talked about here is really how you can execute on it, right? Because we all know that we don't negotiate, we're not comfortable, there's a lot of, you know, barriers, right? So when we're looking at that, I think we want to start to think about plan of action. And when I talk about plan of action, really what am I talking about? And I think, thank you, Julia. So I love this quote by Oprah Winfrey. I had a dear friend and mentor who used to tell me, Kim, luck is for rabbits. I love this idea that luck is preparation meeting opportunity. If you hadn't been prepared when the opportunity came along, you wouldn't have been lucky. And I think this is so true of women because, again, when you go back and you look at women and when we talk about our accomplishments, that we frequently attribute it to other pieces. And I listened to a great TED Talk by Sheryl Sandberg not that long ago. You probably know, I'm sure she's a COO of Facebook. And she talked about this idea of how women don't really take and don't really acknowledge their accomplishments. As we move into negotiations and leadership and we want to assume these higher roles, we need to be comfortable with articulating, with illustrating our value, the difference that we make, the results that we get. And we can't do that unless we do what I did when I applied to be a vice president, unless we take a step back and we think about the difference that we've made, what we've done, how we can accomplish and make a difference. And there's so much great information now as you look about women, especially coming into this new decade. I'm convinced that this is going to be the decade for us, for women. This is really going to be the decade that we advance into leadership. Why do I think that, right? Because we have the skills that are needed. We understand collaboration. We understand the importance of connection. And I think as we look at diversity and as companies start to embrace the differences that women can make, we are ready to make that difference. And so what I want you to do, we're going to go to the next slide. I want you to think about these questions. How can you use negotiations in your current role to demonstrate an understanding beyond your current function? That's one of the questions I want you to consider. The other one that I want you to think about is how can you change your thinking from being reactive to being proactive? We want to be proactive. What's really going to be compelling is not just the fact that we can lead and that we can get things done and we can accomplish things, but it's going to be our ability to be able to articulate that to leadership. And it's going to be up to us to do that. So we're going to give you some time again to go into the breakout rooms. And I really want you to start to explore this. We're going to spend more time on this in our next segment, but I really want you to spend some time on this. And when you come back, if we have time, I'd love to hear some feedback from some of you on what you're starting to think about this idea and how you will start to change your thinking and change your role. So with that, I'm going to allow, I think we'll go into the next breakout room session. back? Are we all back from the breakout rooms? And, you know, a lot of really great conversations, and I'm sure, and I just popped into just one conversation. And it's interesting, this idea of women negotiating and not always negotiating, right? Because how many of us are in roles where even maybe we're the supervisor or we're the hiring person and someone is coming in and they don't negotiate. And, you know, just thinking about that. And when you think about women in negotiating, you know, it's still difficult for us, right? Because there's a different standard for women when we are negotiating. In a lot of cases, there's a paradox, right? Negotiate, but then when you turn around and negotiate, there's certain perceptions that accompany that. You know, sometimes women are, you know, they're not rewarded like men are rewarded. In the same way, you know, women are given different labels when they try to negotiate, especially when they try and negotiate for themselves. So one of the things that's really important to think about, and especially when we start to think about our plan of action and what that looks like, when you start and you take a step back and you look at yourself, one of the key pieces of that is to find someone that you trust, find a mentor, find, you know, a collaborator. It can be someone within the organization that you're at. It could be someone outside of the organization, but find someone that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can strategize, that you can talk about your role. Because, you know, I spent a lot of time coaching and training women, especially, and we're going to talk about this in our middle segment when we talk about some of the tactics. But one of those tactics is stories. Being prepared to share your story, why you have the value that you do, and why you bring the results and everything that you do to the table. And the other reason why I think mentors and other people are really helpful for us is they can help us understand our strengths, and they can also help us get comfortable with our value. And that is something that as women, I think when you think about that, and even when you think about negotiating, it's about value. When I created my business, one of the first things that I had to do was to assign, you know, an hourly rate to my time. And I had to think, okay, what am I worth? Like really on an hourly basis, what am I worth? What is someone going to pay for me, for my time? So it's really important when we think about our plan of action, what we're thinking about there is how we can demonstrate that we can lead a strategic initiative, how we can engage in new conversations to lead our peers, to help them formulate a new vision. And all of that begins with some of the aspects that we're going to talk about, our foundations, our barriers, you know, our tactics, our negotiating, and all this together starts to help us to formulate who we are and what that's going to look like going forward. So I think now we've allowed for some questions, and we'd love to answer your questions. So if you have some and you want to put them in the chat, or Julia, I don't know if you have some questions that we could start to answer.
I have one. Just between now and the next event on the 1st, what could we do to prepare even more? We got the key questions you gave us, but what else should we be focused on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think what I would like to have us do is to think about what is the next step for you? What does that look like? What is it? A job change? Is it a promotion? You know, is it some analysis around your career? Are you looking into the future, what the vision is for yourself? Maybe it might be a short-term goal. Maybe it's a longer-term goal. When I look at myself and I look at my, you know, younger self, even when I was working at AES, did I see myself being in the role that I'm in now? And the answer is no. I never saw myself in this role. I had a very narrow, isolated view of myself and what my role is. So when I think outside of the box. Start to think about if you could create that future, what would you look like? I would have been an employee forever. But when I really look back over my career, and especially being at AES, which is where I was, I just had a narrow view of myself and my capabilities. So I would also say, start to think big, like really start to create a vision for yourself, because I think that's where you can lead, and get away from this isolated, okay, my job is this, I'm in a silo, because that's really how I worked. I was in a silo. And I didn't really see myself going into that broader role. So if you were to create that next step, and there's no limitations, what would that look like for you? Because I think that's where I would say, if I went back to my younger self, think big, think differently.
Are there other questions?
I see one here about start my own company, and I see part of it, I don't see all of it. You know, the decision to start my own business was really an interesting one. And what really happened, and I think this comes around your plan of action. So here's an example for you. So I had a decision to make. I had my own business, and I was working as a consultant, and I was thinking about my business. What would that look like if I was to have my own business? And I was also interviewing for jobs, and I was interviewing at title companies because I have a title background. And so I was interviewing for these title companies, and they really wanted me to go in and build a renewable division for them. They knew that I had this experience on projects. So they said, hey, come in and you can build this renewable division for us, and you have all these contacts, and this will be really great. And I was really starting to walk down that path. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, what would happen if I did that for myself? What would happen? What would it look like if I created my own, if I started creating my own? And so I did my research, and we're going to talk about this too. When I started to think of starting my own business, I called everyone I knew, and I scheduled breakfast, coffee, whatever they would have with me, lunch, and I want to say I met with 30 people in 30 days, someone every day. And I talk about mentors and talking to people, and I sat down with all these people, and I started, strategize, what do you think about my background? What do you think? What are you doing? And so I got all this information together, and then I started using that to create my business. So this is what I'm talking about. When you start to take a step back, engage with stakeholders, talk to people, start to get that assessment of, what if I really think big, if I start to think outside the box, what does that look like? If I'm going to create my own future, what is that going to look like?
I have another one for you, Kimberlee, from the audience. How do we identify our own barriers when we don't even know what they are and what is hindering us from going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Because there's a lot of things that are subtle. So I think, first of all, where do we want to go? What do we want to accomplish? I think is important, because that kind of helps us to take a step back. I think also being honest with ourselves. And this is where I would say having a trusted mentor or friend, engaging with people that are close to you. And this is not where somebody comes in and tears you apart, right? This is someone that you trust, that you say, give me some feedback. What do you think are my strengths? What do you think are my weaknesses? Engage with those people around you and start to understand, what that looks like. And then I think part of it's going to depend on what your mission is, what you want to accomplish. When I worked in different scenarios, there's always only so far you can go. And glass ceiling, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I think, a lot of times as women, we're very sensitive to feedback. And so we're very sensitive, and we kind of put up a barrier just to get feedback. And I think feedback is really important. I did an exercise once where I called on my clients and I asked for feedback. I said, how are we doing? What are we doing good? Great. What are we doing that's great? What are we doing that's not so great? And then we were able to make changes. But having that conversation very important. I would say be willing to have those conversations and engage in that feedback, and being willing to filter it. You know, again, find someone you can trust. You know, this isn't somebody who's going to come in and tear you to shreds.
Okay, we have a few more minutes, but I have another question before we wrap up. And it's a good one. It's from the audience too. Have you ever been in a situation where a negotiation didn't work out, and what happened? What did you learn?
Yes. Yes. And it's very difficult, right? Especially because we're the only woman, you know, a lot of times we're the only woman in the room. And even now, with all my experience, you know, I try to always be professional. And I had a very difficult negotiation with actually what I would think of as a much younger attorney. And I was kind of surprised because I'm thinking, well, they're a millennial. They should be more cutting edge. But boy, every single conversation that we had was really interesting because, you know, we're all very experienced in my company, and he'd send these emails and be very detailed about, you know, here, you need to make this call. And it's like, really? It was very difficult. We have to know who we are. We need to have clarity. And I come back to this a lot in my business because it's not easy. I have a female business owned and operated, and where I employ mostly women. And it's not political, it's just because they were all the smart people in the room. But it's hard. And so I think you have to be grounded in who you are. You have to have your tribe. You know, part of the rationale for us being in pairs and working together is we want to create a tribe. You know, we need to have people that understand our value and our worth and support us in that, because no, we're not always going to be successful. It's going to be hard. It really is. It's hard, you know, a lot. So having that support, super important for us to be able to excel in our role and to be able to do what we need to do, to be able to move forward, because it's not easy. It's not easy.
Oh, that's great. And I hear a lot throughout, a lot of preparation, a lot of knowing who you are, a lot of understanding your BATNA, which we talked about and work on more. But it's, and even we talked about the power of silence. And there's just so many things that go into this. But, you know, to get the support of us women together working on it is really great. So I think this has been great. I'm really looking forward, Kimberlee and everyone, to the next event where we'll get into really a lot of the skills and so forth. I would, you know, anything else, Kimberlee, you want to say before we close up about the next event?
No, except that, you know, we are going to really spend time on tools and tactics. So come prepared to really walk away with some great information on, okay, now that I understand some of these foundations and barriers, how can I really apply this? And that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time on real-time tips, tools that you can use, that you can apply starting that day to make a difference in your negotiations and to start to get different outcomes.
Yeah, and I think that's really the true benefit of the time between now and then, because we can actually reflect on experiences, do some preparation, really think about them, and really use those tools wisely as we talk about real things that have happened to us and things we're looking to do in the future. So I think that's great. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you all. Just a reminder of the dates. We all know them. And if you have any questions for me or Melanie, please reach out. Really appreciate everyone's time today and look forward to October. And check out anything on our website and message us if you have questions. Thank you very much.